It took just one night.
It was something to see.
Brenda McLean couldn't quite believe her eyes.
The river flowing a different direction and saw it going backwards instead of going ahead.
The cause? Chunks of ice blocking the Athabasca River during its spring thaw.
The areas downtown were kind of creeping closer and closer to my spot.
Joseph and Virga's apartment building was about to be flooded when a couple of Good Samaritans swung by and got him out of there.
These two guys in the boat was like, hey man, you need to get evacuated?
More than 10,000 people are in need of help in Fort McMurray and surrounding areas. Now, due to the coronavirus pandemic, unemployment is soaring, which has forced some to use the local food bank.
COVID has sort of created its own sort of microcosm of how we're dealing with things.
Dan Edwards says another problem is that the food bank itself has been damaged by the water.
There will likely be food loss, but at this point, I don't know what that is going to equate to.
Meanwhile, the municipality is asking Ottawa for military support as it juggles other emergencies.
The fact that flooding season and in due course forest fire season is coinciding with coronavirus in Canada is posing some special challenges.
Challenges like observing coronavirus protocols during this crisis.
There are considerations, for example, in evacuation centers that we are considering the physical distancing measures and sanitation measures that need to be put in place.
In the meantime, with hotels almost full, some residents are being lodged at oil sands work camps for now. Rafi Bujikanian, CBC News, Edmonton.
Yeah, good morning, guys. I'm along Jefferson at Utah, just kind of a block from Cherokee Street here. At this intersection, this was easy to see the damage here this morning because as soon as you looked up, you noticed these lights were not working and that side of the street was basically lightless. The power knocked out to this area done by the storms last night. And this is just some of the damage that we're really seeing across our area that these storms let loose last night. Lightning actually hit a house in Creve Coeur overnight. Now that caused a small fire in the basement of a house on Kizu Court. That was just before 1 a.m. The couple who lives there say they heard a loud boom and the lightning blew out some bricks and then traveled into their basement.
I've never been in an earthquake, but if I was in an earthquake, it sounded like it would have been like a huge earthquake and a huge pop sound.
Now also take a look at this. This happened last night along Indiana Avenue in South St. Louis. Wind gusts up to 55 miles an hour toward the roof off of a home. Debris crashed into a car. And then we saw this not far from there. This is on McNair at Arsenal near Benton Park. Winds blew a tree down onto a car. Down tree limbs, not uncommon in South St. Louis as we're waking up this morning. My photographer and I were kind of driving through the area a little bit earlier, and you almost have to swerve a little bit through these streets because there are limbs down everywhere.
Mira, ¿dónde está el niño?
An Australian newspaper claims to have an intelligence dossier from what's known as the Five Eyes, the U.S. and its European allies' joint intelligence sharing group. Now, the document reportedly lays out the extent to which China's government covered up the true nature and extent of the coronavirus outbreak from its earliest days in Wuhan. This is a story that Fox News was first to break 2 weeks ago. Joining us is the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. He's also a former White House National Security Council Chief of Staff in the Trump administration, Fred Fleitz. Fred, thanks so much for your time today. I want to ask you first up about this dossier. It doesn't contain anything from what we can tell that's new, that goes beyond what Fox News has reported about what China knew and when, but it is, if verified, an important confirmation that other countries in the international community, the U.S.'s key allies, agree with us in terms of an assessment of what the Chinese government knew and when.
That's right, Julian. This is a joint intelligence assessment by 5 Western nations that closely cooperate on intelligence: the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And you're right, there's nothing new in it. But what's significant here is that it helps us make the point that accusations that China is guilty of very serious misconduct, possibly criminal negligence in handling this virus, this is not congressional Republicans and President Trump saying that. There is a growing international consensus, not just that China mishandled this, but of serious Chinese wrongdoing, of the government retaliating against scientists and doctors who tried to warn about the seriousness of this virus in December of 2019, of destroying samples, of lying about human-to-human transition. And most important, and this is made in this document, that although the Chinese government shut down Wuhan in January 2020 to stop the virus from spreading across China, it did not cut off international air flights, which allowed this virus to seed itself around the world. And I think this is going to have a devastating effect on China's global reputation.
Warning that the coronavirus pandemic is far from over. Researchers at the University of Minnesota say the outbreak could last as long as 2 years and will not be controlled until 2/3 of the world population is immune. At the same time, social distancing restrictions are being loosened in more states, despite none showing a 2-week decline in coronavirus cases, as laid out in federal health guidelines. The Food and Drug Administration is greenlighting emergency use of an antiviral drug that was found to shorten the recovery time for patients. The nation's death toll from the coronavirus now tops 65,000. But on Friday, the last patient was discharged from the field hospital at New York City's main convention center. That is where Michael George begins our coverage this morning. Michael, good morning.
Jeff, good morning. This convention center, converted to a military field hospital, has really been a symbol for how hard the virus hit New York. But as you mentioned yesterday, a sign of progress as the last patient was released. But doctors are now putting out a warning across the nation saying reopening too early could erase that progress. In California, a fight over access to the beaches. In Maine, the front line is a brewery.
And it's time to get Maine back open.
In state after state, protesters continue to defy orders to stay home and keep businesses closed.
If I walk in the sand and the police want to arrest me, but you're going to have to go into the water and get me.
But a University of Minnesota report released Friday points out the dangers of that attitude. Dr. Michael Osterholm, director of the Infectious Disease Research and Policy Center, spearheaded the study.
That virus will keep transmitting as long as it has susceptible people that they can get at. Now, if we isolated everybody in their own bubble, we would end.
Texas allowed retailers and restaurants to open yesterday, just 1 day after the state reported a record high single-day death toll.
We have a long ways to go in terms of the number of people yet to be infected. We estimate that between 5 to 15% of the U.S. population has been infected, and this virus will not slow down its transmission until we get to 60 to 70%.
For governors basing policy on scientific data and trying to hold the line on reopening, the message is simple.
We're not out of the woods.
But we're not out of the woods yet.
Maryland and Virginia both reported their highest one-day increase in cases Friday. But many who are eligible to return to work may not go back. In Pennsylvania, a mock funeral procession outside a Bell & Evans meat plant underlined the point that meat packers all over are putting their health first. There and at Tyson Foods in Nebraska, workers stayed home until their concerns about health and safety in often cramped conditions are addressed. In the broadest survey of the problem to date, the Centers for Disease Control reported there have been almost 5,000 COVID-19 cases and 20 deaths at 115 meat and poultry processing plants in the 19 states that reported data. But Triumph Foods pork plant in St. Joseph, Missouri is demonstrating what could be the new normal, testing all workers before they can go into the plant.
Wanted to get ahead of the wave instead of behind the wave.
When 92 workers tested positive, they weren't allowed in.
Plant this size can stay in operation, still doing what they do to keep the food supply chain open and yet still test all their employees simultaneously.
And here in New York, the epicenter of the outbreak, the governor is taking a more cautious approach. Schools will be closed for the rest of the academic school year. Some businesses like construction and manufacturing could reopen in about 2 weeks.
Well, as we tackle the COVID-19 crisis, several state governments are starting to relax their lockdown restrictions. But the partial easing of these laws has sparked fears Australia could face a second wave of infections.
For more, we're joined by Deputy Chief Medical Officer Paul Kelly. Paul, good morning to you. Thank you for your time again. Really appreciate it as always. Can we get an update firstly on the latest figures across the country?
So 6762 is the total, and 92 deaths so far. So compared with many other countries, we're doing well, but still, many have lost their loved ones and been affected by this crisis. So we need to be careful as we exit from our current restrictions.
So how many new cases is that overnight?
So it's just 13 over the last 24 hours, and so that's a very good space. And when we think about the last week, less than 100 in the last week. So over the last 10 days or so, there really has been a drop-off in the number of cases around the country, and several states on zero yesterday. So that's very good news.
Paulie, we've talked about this since the start of this crisis, the flattening of the curve. Surely the curve is flattened now.
Yeah, it's pretty much crushed, I think, is what some countries are calling what they've done. We set out to flatten, and there were good reasons for that. And as you mentioned in your promo, thinking about where we were just a couple of months ago in terms of this, with those rapidly rising numbers, it was concerning, and we really needed to do what we've done to get to where we are now, and we're much better prepared in terms of our ability to respond to a worst-case scenario, a second wave, for example, if that was to happen, than we were, say, in January. So that's what we've bought that time. We've mitigated the crisis, but also we've built our capacity in the hospital system and our various other primary care and initiatives as well. So we're very prepared if we did get an increase in cases, but that cautious approach now into the future is what's really required.
Overnight, tensions mounting in Michigan. Hours after protesters stormed the state capitol, demanding an end to the stay-at-home order, Governor Gretchen Whitmer extended a state of emergency in Michigan for another month, just hours before it was set to expire. It comes after Republican-led state lawmakers declined to extend the state's emergency declaration and voted to authorize a lawsuit to challenge the Democratic governor. Whitmer, writing in part, by refusing to extend the emergency and disaster declaration, Republican lawmakers are putting their heads in the sand and putting more lives and livelihoods at risk. I'm not going to let that happen. Elsewhere, with the start of a new month comes a wave of cautious reopenings nationwide.
Good morning. How's everyone doing?
A growing number of states are rolling back retail restrictions. Simon Property Group, the nation's biggest mall operator, will reopen 31 locations in 8 states today. Retail giant Macy's announcing the reopening of nearly 70 stores in the coming days. In Texas, restaurants and retail stores can welcome customers today at limited capacity. Workers at Oddfellows restaurant in Dallas are ready to test the waters.
We also hear our local leaders saying, be very cautious.
On the Texas coast, state beaches are now open to residents with limitations. Florida's Clearwater beaches are set to reopen Monday after hundreds of spring breakers forced them to shut down. But in California, Governor Gavin Newsom is overriding local officials and locking down the shores in Orange County.
Specific issues on some of those beaches have raised alarm bells.
It comes as other states like Illinois are joining Michigan, extending their social distancing mandates.
We really can't begin to open up until we have 14 days of down cycle of those numbers.
None of the states reopening have seen a 14-day downward trend in new cases recommended by the White House before easing restrictions. And overnight, a number of cars came together in downtown Atlanta to stage a mock funeral procession. Organizers say that it was to protest the end of the state's shelter-in-place order, and they're calling it something to illustrate what they call the deadly consequences of the governor's decision to reopen Georgia.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Emily Leonard. And first this noon, let's get you live to Lansing. News 8's Leon Hendricks is there with an update on the stay-home order protests happening right now at the Capitol. Leon?
Emily, good afternoon to you. This is what it looks like right now from the steps of the Capitol building in Lansing. I'm going to move so you can see. There are hundreds of people, over 1,000 people gathered here on the lawn. We see umbrellas up because it is rainy and it is cold. Right now on the stage, Sheriff David Clark, the famed conservative sheriff who often appears on the cable networks, he is addressing the crowd. He's telling them that their freedoms are being trampled on, telling them that he doesn't believe the numbers and the data that he's seeing on TV. And what he said to get this applause he's getting right now is open Michigan. And that certainly appears to be the message that these folks want to send to the governor. It feels a little bit like deja vu because the weather, once again, not cooperating at all with the protests here, much like it was last time, except this time we've got regularly pouring rain over the protests here. But as you can see, there's a lot of people here. You don't see a lot of face masks. You don't see much in the way of social distancing going on here. It really doesn't appear to be the concern for most of these folks. The concern seems to be about the response, about the executive orders that these folks feel is trampling on their rights. So right now, a national celebrity helping to rile up the crowd, and it doesn't seem that the rain is dampening any of the enthusiasm. The crowd just as large as it was since we got here when this whole thing started at around 9 o'clock this morning. Now, last time there was a traffic component to this, a gridlock they called it. That is not happening with this protest. Traffic around the Capitol does move smoothly, though we are hearing folks honking their horns. You do see some folks doing some displays out on the road, but it's not the gridlock that we've seen in the past. It's more of a traditional protest right here on the steps and the lawn of the Capitol building here in Lansing.
Because of the lockdown. So when you think about
beaches are safer than being cooped up at home. Our beaches are safer than being cooped up at home. Mind getting out the street? Thank you. You guys just stay on the sidewalk for me? Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Our churches!
There was no known precedent for the impact of this pandemic.
You've never seen Rome like this before?
No, never.
Italians had to learn the horrors as they were living them. As the country watched the human catastrophe unfold, Italy's government called the first lockdown in Europe. Few here could have predicted how long it would last. From the very first days of lockdown, it was clear the country was in a state of high anxiety.
Come va? Come si sente al momento?
Io al momento ho paura, la gente non è preparata.
E allora? E lei ha paura?
Io no, io non ho paura.
E allora
non
come
ho paura.
mai piange?
Mi emoziono. Tutte queste cose che succedono mi emozionano, ma non per me.
But scratch the surface and the emotion was everywhere. Aurelio was waiting to be served through a hatch at a pharmacy. Along with food stores, they were the only shops still open. Italians seemed calm, adapting to a way of life few could have imagined. But it was clear almost everyone was dealing with their own personal struggle.
There is a big problem with the mind, with the depression, with the ansia.
Anxiety. And are you worried?
For me, there is no problem. There is 3 weeks, 1 month. I imagine a new situation, really good. Come back to sun.
Italians regularly took to their windows and balconies to sing and play music as they came together to say andrà tutto bene, everything will be all right. But few realised at the start what lockdown would mean. 3 weeks became 8. The deadline extended time and time again. The epicenter of the crisis was the northern region of Lombardy, but containing the virus was a national effort. A strict countrywide lockdown, the entire economy at a standstill.
Ciao!
Ciao.
The financial hardship began before lockdown as Italy emptied of visitors. Even essential workers, considered lucky, were barely coping.
Impensabile
È impensabile. 10-15 giorni fa era impensabile una cosa del genere.
E lavoro come va?
Zero. Tutto fermo.
By just day 5 of lockdown, Stefano Cappelli's taxi earnings had already dropped to €30 a day.
E per quanto tempo riesce così?
Io?
Sì.
Non lo so, se non fanno... Non lo so.
1 mese, 2?
No, 2 no. 2 no, assolutamente. Forse 1 mese, forse. Sì.
By Stefano's predictions, he'd have run out of money around 3 weeks ago. The crisis began to take its toll on all Italians as they watched the horrors unfold in the country's north.
Live from Rome on the day Italy became the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak.
Italy became a country of unwelcome firsts. the first to show its hospitals overrun with the sick. The first to call in the army to transport the dead. What we were seeing, hearing, was shocking.
Another big rise in Italian numbers.
Yes, Mark, I can't quite believe we're seeing these numbers. 919 people have lost their lives in the last 24 hours in Italy.
There was no frame of reference to predict the events of this pandemic. This new designated COVID hospital in Rome wasn't yet at capacity, but staff clearly overworked already. As we met medics on our tour, we could feel the weight on their shoulders.
You can just feel how stressed everyone is, so...
The pressure was palpable.
That's it.
Questo no, più di così non posso.
But medical staff were also working with the fear of contagion. Protective equipment like this is essential, but hadn't been available in the early outbreak. The extreme precautions needed to protect from this virus, not fully understood. And this has cost the medical community dearly. More than 180 doctors and nurses have died of COVID-19. Another 2 have taken their lives in this period. More than 300 staff at this hospital alone have tested positive. The head of infectious diseases here described the trauma of working with the fear of dying.
We were asking each other who would be the next. And that, of course, is psychologically demanding, also because we are, apart from being colleagues, we are friends. We are also isolated, each of us at home, because we fear also to transfer the contagion to our beloved ones. So if you put all that together, the workload, the fatigue, the tiredness, that is really psychologically demanding.
We wish you all the best, and we are thinking of you at the moment. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, David.
Good luck.
Thank you.
What they were going through was awful. Italy saw how the virus spread at frightening speed and the slow, painful fight needed to bring it under control. Lockdown conditions were tightened further still. Even exercise limited to the close vicinity of your home. The sense of optimism and hope now hard to find.
In the early days of lockdown, you'd see people singing at their windows and balconies, but you rarely see this at all anymore. It feels like the characteristic warmth of Italians has been replaced by an obsession with personal space. Even the physical act of wearing a face mask seems to have silenced people's spirits. This would have seemed inconceivable 2 months ago. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine life as before.
There's pressure to lift measures sooner in the country's south, where infection is lower, but poverty far higher. This man in Apulia called police after being unable to withdraw his mother's pension, the family's only income. They beg the officers to go to their home to see they have no food. Reports emerged desperate people were raiding supermarkets in Sicily. This fight breaking out in a shop in Campania over someone not wearing a face mask. Another video emerging of a customer refusing to pay. He has no money, he says, but needs to eat.